Hey you! Yes, you! Are you about to settle down with a previously unread classic you just know is going to be your new favorite book? Reader, beware! A recent study has found that an ungodly amount of classics feature prominent spoilers right in the introduction. If you don't want your new favorite book ruined, you would do best to avoid any forward introduction or preface until after... Oh dear, it's already too late. Heathcliff, you naughty boy! Why is this a thing? I've asked myself that question quite a few times. In fact, I have previously made a video on this very same topic, but I still have thoughts on this. Why is it that many classics just straight up spoiler the book, either in the introduction or, what's worse, something that, for example, this edition of The Tent of Wildfell Hall does in the blurb on the back? Why does it tell you the entire plot, including twists and reveals, the sort of fun little moments that make reading a story worth it? Why does it just give it all away in the blurb or in the introduction? I've just randomly pulled out some classics from my shelf, and Wordsworth Classics is like the worst for it. This edition of Far From the Madding Crowd spoilers the plot in the introduction. The Tent of Wildfell Hall spoilers the plot in the introduction and on the back. This Oxford World Classics edition of Wuthering Heights has a big spoiler in the introduction. This Folio Society edition of Emma has a spoiler in the introduction. This Fingerprint Classics edition of 1984 has a spoiler in the preface. And this is just a small, almost like a random selection of classics that I've taken off my shelves just to check. There are many, many more books that do that. And I know that there are many readers who have stumbled across a random plot spoiler as they open up a new classic and read the introduction. If you're not familiar with how introductions to classics usually work, they tend to be basically analyses of the book that are written by some academic or other and printed right at the beginning of the classic that you're reading. So a lot of the time they will explain certain themes. A lot of the time they'll explain a little bit of the behind the scenes, a little bit of the creation history of the book. They'll have a short biography of the author, and they'll just give you some background about the book that you're about to read. But here's the thing, these texts, these analyses, these behind the scenes backgrounds, bits of information, they're not really meant to be read before the book. They're not really meant for a reader who hasn't yet read the book. They are supplementary bits of information that really only make sense if you've already read the book. So why do so many publishers insist on printing them right at the beginning of the book, where any innocent reader might stumble across them unaware that they are about to be spoiled? So why is this a thing? I can only really think of two reasons why publishers choose to put spoilers in their introductions to classics. One of them is that they expect a person who buys a classic to already know the story, which, if you think about it for even just a few seconds, doesn't make sense at all, because at which point is the reader supposed to read a classic for the first time if the target audience for new editions of classics is people who already know them? The second reason, which is much more likely, is that publishers don't expect people to read classics for their stories. And therefore, maybe they expect people to pick classics for the themes, the deeper issues that are addressed in the book, for a historical document of its time, for anything basically other than the plot of the story, which I think is an insult to the authors who wrote these classics. Because as much as Emily Bronte perhaps intended to write a story in which relations between men and women are described with an emotional and imaginative power unparalleled in English fiction, she also clearly wanted to write a story. She wanted to write a plot. She wanted to write about a series of events that happen and that the reader discovers at the same time as the main characters of the book discover them. I can't believe I'm having to define a plot here, because the publishers of classics don't seem to think that classics have a plot, which obviously they do. Something like The Tenant of Wildfell Hall is an absolute page-turner in my opinion. I devoured this book, not knowing where the plot was going, not knowing what the mysteries were that surrounded the characters in the book. And I'm so glad that I read this without looking at the blurb or the introduction, because that would have taken a lot of the fun of this book away if I had already known what was coming up. Rebecca, one of the most iconic early 20th century's thrillers. To give the publisher credit here, which is Virago Modern Classics, this book does not have an introduction. This book starts right with the iconic first line, "Last night I dreamt I went to Manderley again." However, it does have an afterword in which, if you are thus inclined, you can read all about the creation history and about Daphne du Maurier's life and about the themes of the book, after you have already read it and you know what's happening. I really think it is disrespectful to just assume that classics aren't read for the story inside them, because that is the number one reason why I read classics. I don't read classics because I want a philosophy lesson. I don't read classics for the analysis. I don't read classics for the themes. And I don't think classics were marketed to people who read them for the themes at the time that they were published. You know, when Charlotte Bronte published Jane Eyre, obviously under a pseudonym, the people who bought Jane Eyre wanted the story of a governess. They wanted the story of the mysterious Mr. Rochester. They wanted to know what was going to happen. They didn't pick up this book to get a lesson on women's independence. They might have gotten a lesson on women's independence along the way, but that wasn't the selling point of Jane Eyre, was it? The way that publishers are so careless with the story of classics kind of makes classics into pretentious books for pretentious people, when really they're not. But that is, I think, the effect that the way that classics are marketed today has. The idea that classics are not like modern stories which you read for enjoyment. Instead, they are intellectual stories that you read for knowledge. Those are not separate things, right? You can enjoy the story, you can be entertained by the story, and you can learn some things while reading the story, just like with literally any other book. It feeds into this separation between reading for entertainment and reading for some sort of intellectual enrichment. The same separation that people make between genre fiction and literary fiction is made between modern entertainment and classics. And I wish that wasn't there. I wish they would market classics in the same way that they market modern fiction. And as part of that, I wish they'd bloody stop spoilering classics to people who haven't read them. As a little aside to that, I recently came across a publisher. This is not sponsored, by the way. I genuinely came across this publisher while I was researching a previous video, called Pulp The Classics, which reprints classics with sort of pulp fiction style covers and taglines, which is absolutely hilarious. So I'm going to show you some on the screen here. We've got Wuthering Heights. Here's Looking at You, Kathy. We've got Robinson Crusoe. Solitude was driving him nuts. This one might be my favourite. Pride and Prejudice. Lock Up Your Daughters. Darcy's in town, with what looks like a picture of Colin Firth's evil twin on there. This is obviously tongue-in-cheek. This is obviously supposed to be ironic, but I really love this twist on the classics. I like how they're marketing them as these gruesome tales that you spend very little money on and you get a lot of entertainment for. I think Pulp The Classics is doing a great thing here. I don't know if they're selling where I live, but I might have a little look at their selection. I'm also going to link them in the description box. Not sponsored. They don't know I exist. My point is, we're doing classics a disservice if we are putting them on a pedestal of intellectual coldness, if we stop treating them like stories that are worth reading for the entertainment value of them, if we stop presenting them as plots and we instead just present them as a collection of themes and ideas. Because the great thing about novels is that themes and ideas are communicated via the medium of story, and we can't just ignore the fact that classics are first and foremost stories. I think we are doing readers a disservice by promoting and presenting classics in that way, because it suggests that if you want a really good thriller, for example, then you won't find that in a fiction published in the 20th or the 19th or the 18th century, which is blatantly untrue. One of the most page-turning books I read this year was a novel from the 1860s, which was Lady Audley's Secret, a book that I would have found a lot less gripping if I'd known in advance what was about to happen in it. Let's rediscover classics as stories. Let's stop putting story spoilers in the introductions and on blurbs. Let's stop putting the focus on analysis. That's not to say you can't analyze classics, and indeed I like analyzing classics. I like reading analyses of classics, but that's not why I read classics. That's a fun little addition to them after I've read the book and I know what happens in it. After I've enjoyed the story on the surface level, then I can delve deeper and read an afterword, for example, or read a separate piece of analysis. But I think we should trust classic literature to shine by itself and to engross people by itself, without pretending that its only worth is in the analysis of it rather than the plot of it. So with that in mind, I'm going to do a slightly less ranty, slightly more bookish follow-up to this video, in which I'm going to recommend what I consider page-turning classics, books that really gripped me by the plot, and that's coming to this channel soon. But until then, let me know what you think of the issue. Have you ever been caught out by an unexpected spoiler in the introduction area? Or do you actually prefer to know what's going to happen in a book before you read it? Perhaps there's readers out there that appreciate knowing the themes before going into a book. But still, if you are that sort of reader, right, then you can still look at the afterword, right? The thing that bugs me about this whole introduction spoiler business is that introductions are meant to be read before a book. We hardened veterans of classic reading know not to look at an introduction, but most people would just innocently pick up a book and start reading it from page 1. Oh, hey, Minerb. What do you think? Oh, do you think it's feeding time? Minervy. Well, I think Minerva would quite like to stop rambling about classics and instead get to giving her lunch. So I shall do that now. You're purring into the microphone. The sight of her pretty little triangular face makes me forget what I wanted to say at the end of this video. But I'm pretty sure you got the point. Thank you for watching. Bye.